there's a real chance that that could be the revolution and not a shot would be fired. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Fire Pit Chat with Ben and Joe. I'm Joe. Hey, Ben, how are you?
Great, man. Good to be back.
Yeah, really good. And if you've been following along, this is our third in our series. We're doing a couple episodes for election time and election day, and it's coming up on Tuesday. And so it may not age well, but we're going to try. We think that, there's some real good theoretical things we can do, and there's some real practical things, hands-on. I don't want to say boots on the ground, but really just hands-on with ourselves, with our families, with our communities. And so our other two episodes, we talked about, the concept of hate is hate something that's put in me or something inside of me. We talked about the serenity prayer. How do we search and find serenity first, and how does that acceptance lead to courage and wisdom and love? And so we wanted to focus this year on a concept. And Ben, you brought this up. It really blew me away a couple of weeks ago. The concept of 3, 12, and 70, and how the biblical foundation or structure that Jesus created with his disciples, and then the greater good. And it's really, really important. There's one pitfall that I just want to put out at the front, and then Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you. But so this concept, when we're thinking about this 3, 12, and 70, it's not to create a coalition, and we want to be careful even saying those kind of words, but not a coalition that is against somebody, right? So we're not going to create a group of 3 or group of 12 or group of 70 to go attack somebody. That's not the point. The point is to create a coalition or a group or a committee for somebody, not against somebody, but for somebody, your body, the body of the church, the body of Christ. It's a group that's spreading the word and the works of God. There are many coalitions where the spirit today may be out of alignment with the word. And so we're not saying we should go create more of those. And there may be a temptation after the election to do that, right? This is not a call to make more of those. It's a call for transformation and a deep dive into faith and good works based on that faith. So if you have that faith, go into that faith, and then the good works based on that faith. And, identify groups in your life that would fall into a category of a 3, of a 12, or a 70. And I have found, as I've been contemplating this and since hearing about it, looking at it in my life in different areas, the reason for that is I can build a foundation. I can build a support network. And again, it's not a support network of like-minded people to attack others. It's a support network of like-minded people to attract others, to attract ourselves for my growth. And that's that's a difference in the group. So I just want to put that pitfall out. We're not advocating to do anything other than to get a closer relationship with God and your fellows, and a way to perhaps, if I've got that serenity and that acceptance, a way for me to use some courage to change the things I can, and some of that wisdom. So this is some of that wisdom. Ben, I'm going to kick it over to you. It's a great thing. I love this 3, 12, and 70.
Yeah, well, it's not original with me at all. But let me just offer a couple quick thoughts about the Bible and politics. So it's very easy in our North American context to think that the really important things happening in our society are coming from the top down. And so, elections become a very, very big deal, and they are in a way. But if you have the top-down view of things, it seems especially crucial. In the Bible, it's interesting. Say in what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, before Jesus, the history before Jesus comes, you have these massive political powers: Egypt, the Philistines, Assyria, big, big powers, and then you have little Israel. And what's going on in Israel is there's this tiny little thing that happens where you've got a guy named Abraham, then Isaac, and then Jacob. And out of these 3 patriarchs, we call them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God actually talks about himself as, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Eventually, out of Jacob, there come the 12 tribes, his 12 sons, or the 12 tribes of Israel. And by the time his son Joseph goes down into Egypt as a slave, and then he becomes kind of the second in command of Egypt, and eventually Jacob and his family move down there to Egypt before the Exodus, we're explicitly told they are by this time 70 people, including Jacob's grandchildren. Well, then in the New Testament, you have what we call the New Testament. Jesus is here now, and it's interesting. Now you've got this massive political power, Rome, and then you have this little nobody, this Jewish carpenter, this rabbi named Jesus. And of course, he is God in human flesh, and he has a group of disciples. And within that group of disciples, he's got three that are really close to him. And then he's got kind of the 12 disciples. And then eventually he sends out another group of 70 disciples. So you have this contrast between these big political powers that are kind of the movers and shakers of all things in heaven, in the world, it would seem. But what God is doing and what is really going to change the world is not what's happening in Assyria or Rome or these big political contexts. What's really going to change the world is these tiny little forming circles of influence. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob flowing out into the 70, eventually the whole nation of Israel. Jesus and his 3 and his 12 and his 70 disciples, they're going forth, and these are not political action committees. These are,
Right.
They're going out with a message. And without turning that into some kind of, that's the biblical model. Others have reflected on this, and I've been thinking about it. There is, I think, something there of a model of influence, whether it's generationally, where, a small little nucleus of, say, a mother and father can produce children who produce grandchildren. There are other generational forms of growth that are not necessarily biological, but they kind of follow that same exponential pattern of growth. Or more horizontally, just thinking about how our lives influence. We have got this tight little circle, usually of intimates, and then maybe some not quite so intimate, but still close associates or co-laborers or friends. And then there's a wider circle of influence, maybe in an organization or a larger community or neighborhood or whatever it might be, a church, a school. And then we kind of have the world beyond that is potentially changeable through these kinds of influence. But the fact that it begins with this small little circle and kind of flows outward, it's helped me think about how, without hate in our hearts, but with the peace and serenity that comes from God and his sovereignty, his lordship over all things, how we can kind of on the ground, as you said, begin to work out courageously, wisely, some influence. There's some things we can change. There's some lives we can touch, and it can exponentially grow. And so I've just been thinking a ton about this, and I'm just excited to hear what you've been thinking about.
Okay. So just so people understand better. So the concept is the three, right? Which is a handful of close friends. We share our deep thoughts, emotions, struggle, right? We promote accountability. That group of three, in my opinion, at least what I've been thinking about, it needs to be centered around the word or centered around love. And it needs to be an intimate setting. So in other words, the opposite or the ideal to not shoot for would be, hey, all three of us hate so-and-so. So we're going to bound together. We're going to make this group of three that hate. No, it's around love. And those are our closest confidants potentially. And we're going to talk about this, I think, globally. And then in the next episode, we'll talk about how this could be at play at our home, in our families, at work, community, church. But conceptually, that's what I've been thinking about for the three. And then the 12, it could encompass those three. And let's, one other disclaimer, we don't have to get hung up on the number necessarily.
Right.
It's more conceptually, right, of a smaller group, a medium-sized group, and a bigger group.
Yes.
So the 12 is similarly, and I think the way you had described it, and I really like it, is so the three of us, that three or that inner circle, thinks about the good works we can do or the ways we can grow individually or collectively, and then how do we actually do that? And then the 12 is made up of that bigger group, and now there's this collaboration, there's some movement, there's some things again centered around love, centered around the word. It's got the context and the framework that we're doing this. From Christianity, as Christians we're doing this, or whatever that motivation is, as long as it's around the word and the love. And then the 70 is that next level where now those works are starting to happen. And the nice thing about this is that if I have a 312 or 70 and you have a 312 and 70 and someone else, we can begin to see how this could really, to your comment before about Jesus didn't go to the government, he went to the people, how we can do this from the bottom up. And we can grow up as opposed to wait for our elected politician to be voted in or not, right? And make the change. And we can make those changes. But I think if we start connecting with that smaller group and then a little bit bigger group and then start to work in the greater group, there's a real chance that that could be the revolution and not a shot would be fired.
Well, and it's interesting too, and it's important that it is intended to flow outward. I'm not just trying to create a little, silo where the three who agree with me, we kind of sit and just think about how right we are and how
Right.
thankful we are we're not them.
We're doing that now, right? I mean, collectively as society, I think there's a lot of 312 and
Uh,
70s right now, but I think they're not centered on the word or on love.
right, and I think that can then just become a kind of insularity instead of a real desire that I want the love that we're whatever form that love is taking. It can sometimes be creative, sometimes maybe it's an exchange of ideas. It can just be whatever. But that love is intended to sort of be open and welcoming and spreading, as opposed to being defensive or self-righteous, or angry.
I keep hearing in the back of my head somebody going, "Yeah, but what about?" Well, I'll pick this. What about the Supreme Court? We just had a nominee, and that was wrong. And what about that? What about that? And I don't know that I can do anything about that necessarily if I'm against it or for it, right? But the purpose of that three, that inner circle, is to talk about our feelings about that and hold each other accountable.
Hmm.
Right. So
Hmm.
probably I would probably say that in your three would probably wouldn't be one of your kids necessarily,
Hmm.
unless you're much older. Right. And so,
Hmm.
but, it's really whatever those issues are. If you're struggling with whatever you're struggling with in your life, that three, you want to do that. But it needs to be personal. Not to
Yes.
say we don't have an opinion about the political stuff, because we do, but it's okay if I'm really want to affect change. The first change has to be in me, and I want to be with other people that feel the same way. Okay, yeah, I'm flawed man. I have a lot of work to do. I need to work better to serve God and or do godly things, or just to be loving. And so that's when that three, we hold each other accountable, we push each other, and I think that's an important core group to have. And I think to your point, probably probably people may have those kind of groups, but if they were to, I guess the call here is to look at that group and if and do that analysis. Is the center of that love, is that center connection, or is that center maybe something else, which will make it less of.
Yeah, and I think we really have to talk about what is anytime you're talking about the 31270 model, you are talking about a mission of some kind. And I would say that almost without exception, any intrusion of political stuff into this is going to be more or less accidental. I'm not saying you couldn't have a group of intimates, your three, or even a group of 12, as you're trying to build something, you're trying to do something together. You have some kind of sense of mission. Like what are we what ideas, what projects are kind of burning in our hearts to do together in the world? I can imagine people in those kind of associations having conversations about politics, but unless you're actually all politicians,
Right.
or that, is literally your mission, I think, I'm envisioning this at much more of a grassroots level where you've got things you're working on with these people in this place. And sure, you might all share your political views, but it's not what's going on in the big political arena that's fueling this mission. It's much kind of local, organic, and personal, because it's about influence, right? What are you building a business? Are you trying to start a not for profit? Are you, seeking to, be a group that brings some positive changes in a school? Are you is it a neighborhood cleanup project? What's your passion? What do you share that you want to do that's fruitful and constructive? And man, when you connect to people that have a kind of some common loves and some common passion to accomplish things, it can spread like wildfire.
Yeah, I think the place of politics is really the place of all of it, in the sense that if something gets triggered in me in an emotion, right, a strong emotion,
Mm.
I could use that group to help me process the emotion in me,
Right.
as opposed to process the thing, right?
Yes.
Because there are going to be things that are going to push on my emotions, and that inner circle needs to be strong enough that we say, hey, what's going on? Because
Yep.
usually, in recovery, they say if I'm angry, it's something inside of me was disturbed. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean to, again, I know we
Hmm.
say this, and it doesn't mean to, we shouldn't be properly upset at injustice, but it's there's a line. It's sort of, you know it.
Yep.
I know when I'm off. I know when
Yep.
I'm really charged up about something.
Yep.
So the politics may be the way in. So that's okay as long as the conversation doesn't end up just being all about politics. It's more about,
Yep.
okay, what is this triggering in me? How do I bring it to a better place,
Yeah.
to that serenity, so I have courage and wisdom? How do I do that? And so I think there could be many different ways. And sometimes just that chatting will
Hmm.
spur that up, and someone will get triggered and then process it. I think the idea is, let's bring all of our feelings, but let's hold each other accountable,
Yeah.
in a way, because of the greater framework that you said, right? So this greater context of why we're doing this is
Yeah.
for good.
Right. And yeah, part of the function, it seems to me, of your most intimate circle is just to keep you from being just from mission drift, keep you from distraction, from,
Absolutely.
what are you, what's your life about, what are we doing? When Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, he takes his three with him to pray with him because he's about to go into the absolute teeth of his mission. It's very intimate, and he actually is asking for prayer support from these close disciples. So yeah, but I think we have to, kind of get specific about what's the mission, and then that kind of helps give a sense of orientation to the 3, the 12, and the 70 of what are these relationships for, what are they directed toward, what are they trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So if the candidate that I want to win doesn't win, or even if he does,
Hmm.
um, if let's just say, if the candidate I wanted to win doesn't win, what do I think is could happen, right? And then
Yeah.
maybe that becomes a mission of mine, that I want to look at that with that inner circle, so that that thing is important for me, right? I think people would agree there's no perfect candidate.
Hmm.
No one espouses all. A perfect candidate is God, right? Christ. But beyond that, there's no perfect candidate. And so those things, I could take that, if my candidate loses, or even if my candidate wins but doesn't believe what I believe on a certain thing, do I want to take to the streets, or
Yeah.
do I want to your point, I love it, the mission. What's my mission? If I really believe in that thing, then
Yeah.
maybe that becomes a mission, and it could be done through the love of God, right? As opposed to the hate or anger of the world.
Hmm. Yeah. So here maybe we're kind of imagining this model working not so much in the realm of practical projects that we might be working on together, like starting something, building something, but we're talking about just how the influence of ideas can spread. And I think that's very powerful what you're bringing out, that we're going to have people, whether it's about political stuff or other things that we get charged up about, there are going to be these contexts relationally where we have this tight, intimate inner circle where we can really say what we really think, really talk about our true feelings about things, but it's not just kind of mutual venting. It's a commitment to each other and an accountability to each other that is enabling us to sharpen our thinking, become more precise, become more constructive in the way we process things. So that then what flows out is action that's not just reactive and spiteful and all the stuff that we so easily see now. Like, it's the antithesis of the online social media tribe.
Right, exactly. And I mean, and the tribe could have some good attributes, but if it's not
Yes.
centered around the word, or centered around the mission from the word,
Yeah.
right, then it just won't be as effective, and I won't necessarily get what I want. I believe we all do this because we want that feeling of serenity. We want that feeling of love or connection. We want those feelings. And so if I'm not with a group of three that can correct me or
Hmm.
right size me,
Hmm.
then I may be just preventing or stunting myself from getting what I want, for the reason why I have these passions.
Yeah. 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 Agreed. And then, right. And then the question becomes, how then can we begin to kind of spread out from that to, widening the circle of that influence of love and truth and kind of grounding? Because the truth is, this model works with very toxic ideas too. You can have a little group of people that have a lot of anger, a lot of hate, and it can spread like, and literally like wildfire to, suddenly you've got a tribe, and then you've got like a whole movement, and it can get explosive in revolutionary contexts. And what we're looking for is the influence, same kind of relational model, the same exponential growth, but as you're saying, the influence of basically truth and love, right? I mean, and you know, solid, strong, well thought out ideas come from the Word of God, come from just human wisdom as we reflect upon the world. Relational kindness, a motivation of doing good and building, and gentleness in our response even to those who disagree, and that too can spread in this through this model.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that truth, and I think our first show was on truth, but it's that truth that's not necessarily my truth, but to seek the truth. And to your point, I find that in the Word, and I find that with other people, that if we make that our intention, I found that making or setting intentions is really, really important. So if we think of the three, we'll make a sports analogy. I'm sorry if you're not a sports person out there, but I am, and it's the easiest way I can think at the moment. So if we think of the three as a coaching staff, right? So then the 12 would be maybe the team on the field,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the coaching staff, and you've talked about this many times, the coaching staff put together the plans, they study the film,
Mm-hmm.
they look at all these things, they analyze, the game and who they're playing that week to try to figure out how they can make the team the strongest. So then the 12 maybe would be the team.
Yep.
And so they're all united. It's now a bigger group, but we're united, and we support and we care for each other. And we, if we win together. If we lose together. That kind of mentality, that we're all in this together. And I think that idea is, if I've got that inner circle, that I believe God will then present me the 12, or that group.
Yep.
And to your point of spreading out and bringing people into the fold, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really important.
Yeah. And I think that's just how human organization works. You've typically got a small kernel of people that get an idea, or a vision, or a mission that just starts to burn, and they share that and they're excited about it together. But then it's contagious, and suddenly then you've got people, they may not be necessarily generating the vision so much, but they catch the vision, and now they're kind of implementers. And suddenly you've got a once a week small group that starts to gather, or you've got it could be an online collaboration on something that you decide, a website you're going to set up, and material you're going to start to produce, or in a less intellectual environment, you might have some kind of community service idea, and you just start to kind of widen the circle. I mean, three can't do much. 12 can get a lot done, and so it's just a very, very flexible model. And I think it's just kind of how things naturally happen when you got a few people at the core that are excited and energized, and they've got some big ideas, and then it starts to catch. And that's
Absolutely, and or another analogy, a dance troupe, right? And you
yeah,
see all these people dancing, and they're all in sync, and they're
perfect.
all turning and spinning, and then somebody comes and does a flip in the middle, and it's
Yep.
like, wow, how do they do that? Cirque du Soleil shows. So seeing and that all takes time, patience. We talk about patience and framework, and
Yep.
it talks about that. It's coming from that mission, and a good mission, right? A strong mission will probably be motivating or energizing to a lot of people. And then if we look at the 70, the 70 could be the audience in that in that example,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the audience watches that dance troupe, and they're all excited, and I want to learn more about that type
Yep.
of dance. I want to learn
Yep.
how do they do that? And then to your, what we've been saying is, it sort of starts to build on itself. It starts to grow. And now just from a group that started from a small center, centered on the Word, centered on the Lord, centered on mission, centered on wanting to do good. And there's the patience piece again. I can't necessarily jump into that until
Yep.
I've done the other work first. And so we talked about hate, we talked about the Serenity Prayer. So there's a bit of work that
Mm-hmm.
I need to do internally, and I believe in that, and I try to do it as best I can. I'll be most effective if I do that work first. Once I turn to God and work with God, and God works with me, and get his leadership and guidance, then I can be effective. And so there's a journey here.
Yep.
So it may not start on Wednesday for some people, and it's an ongoing journey. But it starts with that first step, of that first desire to say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be part of this. I want to be part of creation in this
Yes.
way, to create something.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm not. I'm not going to try to control the process either, because what if somebody out there in the 70s suddenly becomes, they're forming their own 3 and 12 and 70, and that's, this stuff happens organically, and just the peace to realize, God is working through our relationships and our circles of influence, and I don't need to try to, control and manipulate that. Sometimes it'll just take on a life of its own. But because of that internal serenity, I'm just excited to see growth happening. I'm not trying to necessarily, be in charge of it.
Well, and that's the centered part. So this isn't Joe's revolution or Joe's
Right.
group or Ben's group. This
Right.
is God's work, right?
That's right.
I'll be a conduit, but to God be the glory. Whatever comes of that is because this is what He wanted.
But it is an awareness that I really am always in a place where, as my heart is settled in God, I have influence. We all have influence. It's actually not something you necessarily even have to go create. We all have relationships, which means we have influence. And it's just being aware of that, and from that inner place of peace, being able to say, all right, Lord, just use me. Help me to really focus on doing something with these opportunities to be a part of other people's lives in meaningful ways, and kind of get a sense of the nature of my relationship. Is this a 3 relationship, 12 relationship, 70 relationship, and just how to use that for God's glory.
All right, so we gave you a good overview, Ben. Thank you. That was fantastic. The 3, 12, and 70. We're going to do one more episode for our election coverage here. Very different election coverage than maybe other places, but we think this is important, and maybe is a good antidote or opposite to other things that you may be seeing or feeling. But this is something that really means a lot to us. So in our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about how 3, 12, and 70, though, has a very biblical and spiritual, maybe church base. We can do this in other areas of our life. So we're gonna do that in our next episode. Hey, Ben, thank you. This was really great and helpful.
Loved it, Joe. Thank you.